The old military barracks had been abandoned for decades, left to decay under the weight of forgotten history. The locals whispered about strange occurrences, but no one dared to step inside after dark. I had always been drawn to places like this, forgotten, eerie, steeped in mystery. Maybe it was my fascination with the unknown, or maybe it was just my reckless curiosity. Either way, I found myself standing in front of the rusted gate, flashlight in hand, camera strapped to my chest. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and rusted metal. Weeds had overtaken the once well-kept grounds, stretching through the cracked pavement like veins of something long dead but not quite willing to let go. The gate creaked open with an unsettling groan, as if it hadn't been touched in years. I hesitated for just a moment before stepping inside. The structure itself was massive. Rows of crumbling buildings standing against the night sky like silent sentinels. I had read about this place before coming here. It had once housed soldiers during wartime, but something had gone wrong. There were reports of mass hysteria among the troops, men turning on each other, speaking of things in the dark that weren't there. Eventually, the base was shut down, and those who had survived were discharged under vague circumstances. I clicked on my camera. The dim glow of my flashlight illuminated the cracked walls, old peeling paint, and shattered windows. The wind howled through the open hallways, making the doors sway gently on their rusted hinges. It was easy to dismiss the sounds as just the building settling, but something about this place felt off. The first room I stepped into was lined with rows of metal-framed bunk beds, each covered in layers of dust. Old footlockers lay scattered across the floor, their contents long gone or stolen by time. I bent down, running my fingers over one of the beds. The thin mattress felt brittle, almost like paper. A sudden creak echoed from behind me. I spun around, my flashlight beam darting across the empty hallway. Nothing. Just shadows stretching across the floor. I exhaled sharply, shaking my head. Calm down. It's just an old building. Continuing down the corridor, I noticed faded names scratched into the walls, likely left behind by the soldiers who once called this place home. Some were full names, others just initials. One caught my eye. M. Carter, scraped deeply into the concrete as if someone had carved it in desperation. A sudden chill ran down my spine, and I realized the temperature had dropped significantly. My breath fogged in the air. That wasn't normal. It wasn't that cold outside. The feeling of being watched settled over me, an instinctive primal sensation that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I turned back toward the entrance, deciding to check another part of the building. The moment I stepped into the next hallway, my camera glitched. A burst of static cutting through the feed. Then from somewhere deep within the barracks, I heard it. A whisper. Soft, barely audible, but definitely there. It came from one of the rooms ahead, a voice speaking in hushed, urgent tones. My grip on the flashlight tightened as I moved forward, heart hammering against my ribs. The room at the end of the hall had a partially open door, swaying slightly as if something had just passed through. I took a slow breath and pushed it open. Inside, rows of desks stood covered in dust. An old typewriter sat at the far end, untouched for decades. Papers were scattered across the floor, yellowed with age. I stepped inside, scanning the walls. Military charts, orders, maps, all relics of a time long gone. But one document stood out among the rest, sitting neatly in the center of the desk, as if someone had placed it there recently. I picked it up, the paper brittle between my fingers. It was a report detailing a classified incident. The words were faded, but I could make out bits and pieces. Unexplained psychological breakdowns, soldiers reporting seeing figures in the dark, violent outbursts, all records sealed. A sound behind me made my blood run cold. The distinct clicks of a boot against the floor. I wasn't alone. The moment I heard that sound, my entire body went rigid. It wasn't the creak of old wood or the distant rustling of the wind. It was deliberate. A footstep. Someone, or something, was in the room with me. I didn't turn around immediately. My grip on the paper tightened, breath shallow. Slowly, I lowered the document back onto the desk and shifted my flashlight toward the floor, angling it just enough to see if there was a shadow behind me. Nothing. The silence in the room felt unnatural, thick like a heavy fog pressing down on my ears. The air had an almost static charge to it, as if the whole building was holding its breath. Then, just as I was about to move, I heard it again. A whisper. This time it was closer. A chill ran down my spine as the words slithered through the air, too faint to fully understand, but unmistakably human. I spun around, flashlight cutting through the darkness. The beam landed on the empty rows of desks. The room was just as I'd left it. But the whisper hadn't been my imagination. I took a cautious step toward the door, ready to leave, when something flickered in the corner of my eye. My flashlight caught movement near the far end of the room, just outside the window. I turned quickly, aiming the beam at the glass. For a split second, I saw it. A figure. Not fully solid, but there. A dark silhouette standing just beyond the window, its shape barely distinguishable from the shadows. It was watching me. My heart slammed against my ribs. I staggered backward, the flashlight shaking in my grip. But as soon as I blinked, it was gone. The hallway outside felt even darker than before, as if the barracks themselves were swallowing the light. My camera's screen flickered again, static distorting the image. I tapped it lightly, but the interference continued. My instinct screamed at me to leave, but I needed more footage. I moved cautiously down the corridor, stopping at another doorway. The brass number on the wall had long since faded, but I could tell this room had once been an officer's quarters. The furniture inside was still mostly intact. An old desk, a wooden chair, a rusting bed frame. Dust coated everything in a thick layer. Something about this room felt different. I stepped inside and immediately noticed a strange smell. Something faintly metallic, mixed with the damp scent of rotting wood. It reminded me of old blood. Then I saw the writing, scrawled across the walls in what looked like charcoal or something darker, were desperate messages. Don't look at it. It knows you're here. It comes at night. Each phrase was scratched into the paint with frantic strokes, as if someone had written them in a hurry, terrified of whatever was chasing them. I raised my camera, trying to capture the chilling messages, but as soon as I did, the screen flickered violently. The static grew worse, distorting the image until my camera completely shut off. A sudden sharp knock sounded from behind me. I turned so fast that I nearly dropped my flashlight. The door to the room, which I had left wide open, was now half closed. Something had moved it. A cold sweat broke across my forehead. Every instinct told me I wasn't alone. Something was here, watching me, toying with me. I moved cautiously toward the door, my pulse hammering. Just as I reached out to push it open, a low, guttural breath rasped against my ear. I jerked around, shining the flashlight wildly. Nothing. But the air was freezing now, my breath visible in the dim beam of light. The walls groaned, as if the building itself was shifting, and then a voice, right behind me. Leave. It was a harsh whisper, hoarse and urgent, not human, not normal. I bolted out of the room, nearly tripping over my own feet as I stumbled into the hallway. My flashlight flickered again, casting erratic shadows along the walls. The atmosphere had changed. It was heavier now, suffocating, as if the barracks themselves were alive. I forced myself to slow down, taking deep breaths. If I panicked, I'd make mistakes. I needed to get my camera working again and find a way out. As I moved toward the exit, I noticed something I hadn't before. A trail of fresh footprints in the dust-covered floor. Not mine. They led deeper into the building. I stared at the footprints, my mind struggling to make sense of them. They were fresh, pressed deep into the dust, leading into the darkest part of the barracks. Someone had been here, or something still was. A deep, gnawing fear settled in my chest. But I couldn't turn back now. If I ran, I knew I would regret it for the rest of my life. Whatever was happening in this place, I needed to see it through. Taking a slow breath, I followed the prints. The hallway stretched before me like a tunnel. The air thick with something I couldn't describe. Not just dust, but something heavier, almost sentient. My footsteps barely made a sound as I moved forward, flashlight beam swaying across the crumbling walls. The deeper I went, the stronger the feeling became. I wasn't alone. A loud bang shattered the silence. I froze. It came from up ahead, a door slamming shut with unnatural force. My flashlight flickered violently, struggling against the darkness. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. A figure darted across the hallway. A blur of shadow, too fast, too fluid to be human. My breath caught in my throat as I swung my light toward it, but there was nothing, just empty space. I moved forward, pulse hammering. The footprints led to a door at the end of the hall, slightly ajar, its wood warped from years of neglect. I pushed it open. Inside was a barracks infirmary. Old metal beds lined the room, rusted frames holding what remained of filthy, decayed mattresses. The air was stale, filled with the scent of mold and something sour, something like rot. And then I saw them. Handprints, dozens of them, smeared across the walls in dark, dried streaks. Some looked frantic, as if people had clawed at the walls in desperation. Others were smaller, too small. My stomach twisted. These weren't just stains from time. This was something much worse. A soft creak sounded behind me. I spun around, my heart slamming against my ribs. The door, the one I had left open, was now closing. I lunged forward, grabbing for it, but the second my fingers touched the wood, an icy force shoved me backward. I hit the floor hard, gasping as my flashlight rolled away, plunging the room into near darkness. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to grab it, my hands shaking, and then a whisper. Not just one. Many. Layers of voices, all speaking at once, rising and falling in broken, desperate murmurs. I gripped my flashlight and pointed it toward the doorway. Something was there. A shadow stood just beyond the threshold, tall and unmoving. Its form wrong, jagged, shifting in ways that didn't make sense. I couldn't see its face, but I knew it was looking at me. The voices grew louder, more frantic. Some begged, some laughed, a twisted, broken sound that made my skin crawl. And then, all at once, they stopped. Silence. The shadow lunged. I barely had time to react before freezing force slammed into me, knocking the breath from my lungs. It was like being hit by a wave of pure dread, an unbearable, suffocating weight pressing down on me. My vision blurred, my ears rang, and for a split second, I wasn't in the barracks anymore. I was somewhere else, somewhere cold, dark. I saw flashes of movement, soldiers screaming, clawing at their faces, shadows wrapping around them like living things. I heard gunfire, but no one was fighting an enemy they could see. They were fighting something else. And then, I was back. Gasping, I scrambled to my feet, my entire body trembling. The shadow was gone, but the room felt wrong, tainted, as if something had seeped into the walls themselves. I needed to leave. Now I stumbled toward the door, pushing it open with all my strength. The hallway outside was darker than before. But I didn't care. I ran. Footsteps echoed behind me. Fast, heavy, gaining on me. I didn't look back. I burst through the barracks entrance, nearly collapsing onto the cracked pavement outside. The moment my feet hit the ground, the air changed. The weight lifted. The voices were gone. But as I turned back to look at the building, I saw it. In the highest window, a figure stood watching me. And I knew this wasn't over. I stood outside the barracks, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The night air should have felt cool, refreshing, but it didn't. It was thick, heavy, as if the darkness itself had weight. I stared up at the window where I had seen the figure. Nothing now, but that didn't mean it was gone. I needed to get out of here. Gripping my flashlight tightly, I turned away from the building, my legs still shaky. The open field leading back to my car felt unnaturally silent. No wind, no insects, not even the distant hoot of an owl. The world around me felt wrong. I took a step forward, then another, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps, not mine. I froze. The sound was coming from behind me, from inside the barracks. Slow, deliberate steps moving toward the doorway. I didn't want to look. I shouldn't look. But some terrible, irresistible force made me turn my head. And I saw it. A figure standing in the open doorway, silhouetted against the darkness inside. But it wasn't just standing. It was copying me. Every slight movement I made, it mirrored. Head tilting at the exact same angle. Shoulders rising and falling with each breath, fingers twitching just like mine. I took a step backward. It did the same. A cold wave of fear crawled up my spine. I lifted my flashlight, shining it directly at the figure. There was nothing there. The doorway was empty. My pulse pounded in my ears. I knew what I had seen. I wasn't imagining it. I turned back toward the field and started walking again. This time faster. My car was parked just beyond the trees. If I could make it there, I would be safe. I kept moving, trying not to listen for the footsteps behind me. But they were still there, still following. The trees loomed closer, almost there. Then my phone buzzed. I nearly jumped out of my skin. My hands fumbled as I pulled it out, my heart hammering. The screen was dark, no incoming call, no notification. Then it vibrated again, and again. Each buzz came faster, more frantic. My flashlight flickered violently, the beam twisting and distorting like something was inside it, trying to get out. And then, without warning, the phone screen lit up. A single message appeared. "Don't turn around." A scream built in my throat, but I choked it down. My hands were ice cold, my body frozen in place. Something was right behind me. I could feel it, the weight of unseen eyes pressing into the back of my skull, the faintest shift of air, the almost imperceptible sound of breathing. But I didn't turn around. I ran. Branches whipped at my arms as I sprinted through the trees, my breath ragged, my legs burning. My car was just ahead. I fumbled for my keys, nearly dropping them in my desperation. Finally, my fingers closed around the metal. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut behind me. Silence. The only sound was my own frantic breathing. I turned the key in the ignition. The engine sputtered. I tried again. Nothing. The car was dead. My pulse thundered in my ears as I grabbed my phone, hands trembling. I needed to call for help. But as soon as I looked at the screen, my stomach dropped. The camera app was open, and it was recording. The lens was pointed at the back seat, and in the faint glow of the screen, I saw it. A face, mouth stretched too wide, eyes too dark. A shadow where a person should be. And then, the whisper. You brought me with you. The last thing I saw before the screen went black was my own reflection, smiling back at me, but I wasn't smiling.